At the age of 28, police say Brown's obsession with flames resulted in tragedy. He's now facing court charged with the murder of 6 people who were killed in a fire at the Downunder backpackers hostel in Sydney. Today, as Peter Wilkinson reports, the court was shown a videotape that police claim shows Gregory Brown's confession to that ghastly crime.
September 1989, horror in King's Cross at the Downunder Backpackers Hotel.
I don't know, I think a lot of people want to get out, really, because the backpackers was full. There are a lot of people still in there, and if there's people still in there, they were unconscious.
In the end, 5 bodies were found in the charred remains of the hotel. A 6th person died later.
So it appears to have started on the ground floor and headed up into the residential part of it.
The cause? Somebody lit a fire.
What did you use to start the fire?
Just a lighter. Lit up the pamphlets and that.
Why did you start this fire on the 7th of September last year?
Just to burn the place down.
This is Gregory Brown telling police that he's responsible for the Backpackers Hotel and 134 other fires.
I knew there was people in there, but someone might put it out before it got out of hand, but no one put it out.
Did you realise your actions by starting this fire would endanger the people staying at the hotel?
Yes.
Brown is now in court pleading not guilty to the 6 murders. But this is Brown making what the police say is a confession. There's no evidence here that Brown is being forced to make it up.
Are you aware that 6 people died as a result of that fire on the 7th of September last year?
Yes, I am.
The police recorded this after they arrested Brown over another fire in the Matthew Talbot hostel almost a year after the Backpackers Hotel tragedy.
It was scary. It's probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me. It's not something you like to look back on, but it just was actually terrifying, just sheer panic.
At the Backpackers Hotel, Nick Chard was in room 14. He escaped by climbing onto the roof, but unfortunately, his 2 roommates didn't.
They both died. Morgan and Johan both died from asphyxiation. We had to go and identify them the next day in the coroner's at the lab.
Nick Chard is now pulling beers at the Taylor & Walker in London, but his nightmares are in Australia.
Somebody that's done that is sick. They either need help or putting away, because it's not nice to do that to people, especially if it is just a thrill or something. It's sick.
What was your intention for starting this fire?
Burn the whole place down, really.
To burn the whole place down, really?
It's alleged that Brown has said that after lighting the fire, he actually bought a Coke and sat back to watch his handiwork.
No, outside the tennis shop. I stayed there for about 5-10 minutes, then went off. Then I come back the next day and saw what happened.
Incredibly, on the basis of this confession and investigations that followed, Brown has been charged in relation to 135 fires. Brown's mother said he's always been fascinated by fire. He'd light the family incinerator if there was nothing else. She paints a matter-of-fact profile of an adopted, aggressive boy with a history of boys' homes. She put this 30-year-old's mental age at nothing past 14.
Did you know that persons were residing at the premises at the time you lit this fire?
I knew that.
You knew that?
Yeah.
And did you have any concerns for their welfare?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Did you have any intention to harm these people in any way?
Not really, no.
It's just sick. It's just appalling.
Peter Wilkinson reporting, and the defence barrister will argue in court that Gregory Brown made that videotape confession simply to gain notoriety. The case continues. Next up.
Of the murder of 6 backpackers who died in a fire at a hostel in Sydney's King's Cross more than 3 years ago. In the Supreme Court, Justice McInerney cleared Gregory Alan Brown of murder on the basis of diminished responsibility. Justice McInerney also found Brown guilty of malicious damage to the backpackers' hostel, which was gutted by the September '89 blaze. French the building, knowing that dozens of tourists were asleep inside.
After setting fire to the Downunder backpackers' hostel, Gregory Alan Brown slipped across the road to McDonald's. He sat sipping Coke and watched the building burn. 6 young backpackers died in the blaze. Today, Brown was found not guilty of their murder, but guilty of 6 counts of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. When arrested, Brown claimed the backpackers was just one of 200 fires he'd lit in buildings. Justice McInerney, sitting without a jury, concluded, "He's a pyromaniac. I am satisfied he has lit a number of fires in this state as well as in Victoria. I am satisfied he lit fires without the slightest concern for the consequences." The judge accepted evidence from psychiatrists that Gregory Brown had probably suffered brain damage at birth. His mother confirmed he'd always been fascinated with fire and would chop the branch off a tree if there was nothing else to burn. Brown told police he was crazy about the colour red. Justice McInerney rejected the defence argument that he'd made a false confession to get attention. Brown will be sentenced next year. He still faces 150 charges relating to other fires. Felicity Moffat, 7 Nightly News.
Guilty of the manslaughter of 6 backpackers in the Downunder hostel blaze 3 years ago. 30-year-old Gregory Brown chose to appear before a judge instead of a jury in a case that was marked by confusion right up until the final verdict.
September 1989, 6 innocent tourists incinerated, police left with no motive, no leads. It was a year before Gregory Alan Brown came forward, claiming he'd lit hundreds of fires in Sydney, then matter-of-factly admitting to the backpackers.
Why did you start this fire on the 7th September last year?
Just burn the place down.
At first, police didn't believe him. His confession was confused. But Brown's adoptive mother told police, even as a child, her boy loved lighting fires.
What did you use to start the fire?
Just a lighter. Lit up the pamphlets and that.
But when his trial for murder began, Brown changed his story, pleading not guilty. His lawyer argued, sometimes he tells the truth, other times he lies. It's impossible to know. So was Brown telling the truth, fantasising, or straight-out lying when he confessed to police? All possibilities. But Justice McInerney today said he was convinced there were some details about the fire that Brown simply couldn't have known unless indeed he'd started it. Although the hostel was reduced to a charred shell, Brown knew the layout and took police to exactly where the fire began. Said Justice McInerney, "I believe he's not without considerable cunning. He knows he lit the fire but is attempting to lie." Brown was found not guilty of murder but guilty of 6 counts of manslaughter. He'll stay in jail until he's sentenced next year. He still faces another 134 charges of arson. Daniel Blyde, National 9 News.
Packers hostel fire in King's Cross has been sitting in jail waiting for the verdict. Gregory Alan Brown confessed to police that he deliberately lit the fire which turned the hostel into a veritable funeral pyre for 6 young travellers, only to change his story when he came before the court. Well, today, Justice McInerney finally delivered his judgment. Edwina Gatenby has all the details.
What was your intention for starting this fire?
Burn the whole place down, really.
To burn the whole place down, really?
When we started on fire in the interview, Gregory became excited, and it was as though a fire was lit inside himself.
Did you realise your actions by starting this fire would endanger the people staying at the hotel?
Yes.
Well, Gregory's about the most dangerous person I've ever seen.
September 17, 1989. Fire swept through the Downunder backpackers hostel in King's Cross. 6 travellers were trapped, their young lives tragically cut short.
Today's her birthday, so, you know, all those times come up and it's another year without her, and it's hard.
3 years may have passed, but the grief of losing a daughter will never cease for the mother of one of those killed. June Hill lost her daughter Cindy and a future son-in-law.
It's just so sudden. 1 minute they're there, 1 minute the next they're not, and it's just silence, total silence.
But who was responsible for such a hideous crime? It took 1 year before this man, Gregory Alan Brown, came forward and confessed not just to the backpackers' fire, but some 200 others.
What did you use to start the fire?
Just a lighter. Lit up the pamphlets and that.
Brown was charged with 6 counts of murder, and the case seemed cut and dried. An admission on videotape, a crime solved, and Gregory Alan Brown would go down in history as one of this country's most notorious arsonists. But the way the case shaped up in court made mockery of the notion that there's any such thing as a sure thing.
Most likely reason he admitted to them is that he did it, and that he got some pleasure out of admitting to it.
That's how Dr. Rod Milton, the forensic psychiatrist who examined Brown, saw it. But Brown's defence claimed he was a confabulator, a man who admits to crimes for notoriety.
I imagine it was common sense. I think that he saw what would be the results of admitting to the fires in terms of prison sentence and that sort of thing, and he did what was sensible.
What is the reason for telling us about this fire now?
Don't want to get out of my mind.
Members of my unit then went out there to speak to him, and he confessed to them that he had lit in the vicinity of 200 fires in Sydney area alone.
Arson Squad Detective Steve Liversidge agreed he too thought at first Brown's confession was too good to be true. But then...
I took him up to the backpackers hostel, and in the foyer area he identified the exact spot where the fire was started.
But getting a conviction was proving tough. You see, in court it was proved Brown couldn't possibly have lit many of the fires he'd confessed to. In some cases, he was in jail. In others, not even in the same state.
Do you agree that on the last occasion I spoke to you about the fire, you indicated a different time?
Yes, I do. But I was all confused then. I still am.
Brown, described as slightly brain damaged, had shown signs of pyromania even as a child.
He used to set his mother's fowls on fire by putting them in an incinerator and hearing them flapping around inside as they died in agony, and that was very pleasing to him. He liked that.
Today in Sydney Supreme Court, Brown was convicted, not of murder, but for the manslaughter of 6 people. The judge said Brown's abnormality of mind meant he couldn't be held fully responsible for the killings.
I don't think he has any concept of other people's lives or of other people's suffering. I think he's quite aware of his own suffering and has a lot of concern for himself, but he just isn't aware of what other people feel or how they suffer or anything like that.
And Gregory Alan Brown is now awaiting sentence.